Hey everybody, KC here. So all businesses have foundations, right? But foundations need to be tended. They tend to be nurtured because if you ignore them, they can rot away. Bad things happen. But sometimes, even if you're paying attention to the foundations of your business, things can happen. Stuff happens. And then you have to figure out ways to kind of reinforce the foundations of your business and figure out what are the really important foundations and which ones aren't. I've been thinking about this lately because there was a really interesting story in the Boston Globe the other day, pointing to an architectural problem they're having in Beantown. See, in the mid-19th century, when they were building a lot of the buildings in Boston, they followed basically what was a mid-19th century practice of that came from Europe. And what they would do is they would drive the pilings deep into the ground, wooden pilings deep into the ground, and then build up from there. And what would happen is the pilings would be so deep that basically they'd be in groundwater. And the idea, as long as the pilings were saturated by groundwater, they could remain strong for centuries, right? As long as the groundwater remained high. Here's the problem. Climate change, drought. Suddenly the groundwater table has dropped, and some of the pilings on which these buildings are built, are beginning to dry out. And they're worried about buildings starting to collapse, or certainly the foundations crumbling, right? And it's a really big problem. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of buildings that were built on these kinds of foundations in dozens of neighborhoods all over Boston. And a lot of them are kind of historical buildings. So there's a real concern about what are they going to do. Now, there are various solutions they went into in the story, and a lot of them tend to be expensive. But the larger point that I thought was a good metaphor for business was, A, you got to pay attention to your foundations, and B, you have to be vigilant about the fact that sometimes there are circumstances that occur that are going to threaten your foundations. And you have to be prepared to deal with those challenges. Because the one thing you can't do is ignore the threats. Ignore the threats and the foundations crumble, and everything built upon them can go away as well. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this morning. And as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.